It was about 19 years ago. I was delivering Shalach Manas to Rabbi Goodman, and it was right here in this driveway. And I had given him the Shalach Manas, and he says to me, "Mr. Geller, did you know that there were two Megillas Esthers?" And I said, "No, I was lucky to know that there was one." And he said, "Do you know why you don't know that there are two Megillas Esthers?" I said, "Why?" He goes, "Because you didn't read the Megillas Esther." Let's read the Megillas Esther.
Shalom Uvrach, and welcome to the weekly piece on the Parsha from Torah Giants on Chumash, written by Rabbi Yitzchak Goodman, the Rabbi Emeritus of Young Yisrael Rockaway. Sit back and enjoy.
Welcome to Torah Giants on Chumash. I'm Steve Geller. Rabbi Goodman accomplishes something truly remarkable, the heavy lift of walking us all through the secrets of the Megillas Esther that have, at some point, bothered all of us. The crescendo of this effort is to illuminate something that you will never forget and that will always stay with you as the emes of the Megillas Esther itself. Rabbi Goodman brings us 6 questions. All these questions can be answered based on a principle established by the Ibn Ezra at the beginning of the Megillah, but with a small variation. He gives the classic answer to the best-known question raised about the Megillah: why is God's name absent from the entire work? He posits that when Mordechai wrote it, it was with clear understanding that it would be rendered in many languages for the entire population of the king's provinces to read. Mordechai feared that the translators would change Hashem's name to the name of their respective gods, so he intentionally left it out. There can be no doubt that this was intentional. Anyone who reads carefully the verse 4:14 will see that this pasuk cries out for God to be mentioned, yet Mordechai circumvented it with the strange phrase mimakom acher, from some other place, with the word makom being a word used to describe Hashem. Rabbi Goodman is convinced this is not the way Mordechai expressed himself to Esther in that pivotal moment. Once we recognize that this was the only book in the Tanakh that was meant for public reading, including by non-Jews, all of our questions begin to disappear. How can it be that Esther is forced to marry the non-Jew and we don't express great sorrow over it? Of course, Esther wept and Mordechai bemoaned the situation that brought her to the palace and eventually placed her on the throne. He surely prayed long and hard that she be returned home as soon as possible. But how could Mordechai dare to describe this victory of Esther's selection by the king as a tragedy to the king's subjects all over the kingdom? They would be furious to hear that this lady was unhappy being queen and would scream for her to be removed or even executed. Nevertheless, Mordechai knew that his own brethren must know the true facts, so he cleverly hid the truth in carefully constructed verbiage that non-Jews would never take notice of, but that a clever Talmudic Jew would notice. He describes the girls in the contest as gathering in Shushan, while in the same verse states that Esther was taken. To make sure that the Jews would realize the significance of this verb, he repeats it in verse 16, where she is taken to the king. Previously, all the girls were described as coming to the king with great anticipation. Question 2. Is it really believable that Haman got permission from his king to kill the Jews without mentioning whom he meant to annihilate? Of course, the king asked Haman who he wanted to annihilate. Mordechai wrote no false statements in this dialogue, but the gory details were left out. Now we can fully understand that Chazal, who knew this by tradition, revealed in the Gemara for Jewish eyes only the secret about the king's true feelings. In a meaningful parable, they compare Haman and Achashverosh to two neighbors who discuss each other's problems. One complains he has a huge pile of dirt in his backyard and he has no idea where to send it. The other describes a large hole that opened in his yard which needs filling material. Happily, each solves the other's problems. So too, Rav Shimon Moshe Diskin in his Midrash Shimoni, Haman saw the Jews as abominations, the lowest creatures on earth. Achashverosh hated them because of their superiority when compared to his other subjects. This secret could not be recorded by Mordechai for obvious reasons. If the people of his kingdom realized that Achashverosh had such a low opinion of the Jews and only defended them for the sake of his wife, and because a Jew named Mordechai had once saved his life, they would also see the Jews as inferior people. By leaving the king out of this unseemly discussion, it was much more palatable to picture the dead Haman as the diabolical victim and present the king as a lover of this exalted Jewish people. Questions 3 and 4. When Mordechai's ancestors are listed, Ben Shimi, Ben Kish, we're told by Chazal that Kish was the father of Shaul, but why was Shaul's name left off the list? And question 4, we all know that Haman was an Amalekite. Why was he exclusively described as Agagi, or the son of Hamdasa, without once clearly noting that he was from our archenemy Amalek? A Jew who knows Tanakh can recognize from Ben Kish that Mordechai of the tribe of Binyamin is a descendant of Shaul. He will also recognize in the name Agagi that Haman is from Amalek. The biblically inexperienced non-Jewish reader of that time won't recognize either of these hints. Mordechai didn't want them to understand that his battle against Haman was actually the Jews' ancient war with Amalek. Why should they ever know that they assisted a Jewish war based on a hatred created centuries before that they had nothing to do with? Question 5, why does the Megillah begin awkwardly? In the days of Achashverosh, then this is Achashverosh who rules, and finally states that he is the king Achashverosh. As Chazal tell us in the Gemara, Achashverosh moved up from lower stock to become king by marrying the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. Mordechai wanted only his Jewish readers to remember forever the humble beginnings of Achashverosh. He accomplished this by relying on our clever way of understanding texts. First, the king is introduced by his name alone, as if he is just another guy. Next, he's mentioned as ruling, the verb molech. Finally, he's called Hamelech, King Achashverosh. The 3 stages also prepare us for the plot of chapter 1. Obviously, Achashverosh felt uncomfortable in the role and finally built up the courage to try to humble the real royal, Queen Vashti, and make it appear that he only married her for her good looks. Of course, she understood this ugly attempt and gave her royal refusal, setting us up for the rest of the story. These points also couldn't be clearly written at that time in a Megillah for the public's consumption. It would have been an unforgivable insult to the king, who Mordechai now served as a chief minister in the palace. Question 6, after introducing Mordechai for the first time as HaYehudi, why does the Megillah identify him several times as Mordechai HaYehudi and 3 times in close proximity at the very end of the Megillah? We've never seen this of any other Jewish hero in the entire Tanakh. To make sure that any remaining anti-Semites in the kingdom get the message that bothering Jews is no longer a wise option, the Megillah reminds all of us, especially several times at the end, that Mordechai, the new chief minister, is a Jew. A Jew, a Jew. Anti-Semites better beware of picking on them. We may now understand in a new way a strange phrase near the end of the Megillah that you've all come to hear. V'tichtov Esther Hamalka bas Avichail, Queen Esther, the daughter of Avichail, Mordechai HaYehudi, and Mordechai the Jew, as called Tokef, with all the authority, L'kayim es Igeris HaPurim Hazos Hashenis, to ratify this second letter of Purim. And this gets back to my Purim from about 18 years ago. Is this Megillah really a second one? Several Mefarshim offer explanations for this strange word, but they are all, in Rabbi Goodman's humble opinion, somewhat awkward. He presents instead the simplest interpretation. Indeed, this was a second version of the story that Mordechai sent out to the communities. The first one is probably alluded to in an earlier pasuk, where we find that Mordechai sent out Sefarim, possibly a Megillah, just to the Jews. V'yichtov Mordechai, and Mordechai wrote, Es hadvarim ha'ela, all of these events, v'yishlach Sefarim el kol ha'yehudim, and he sent out Sefarim to all the Jews. Asher b'chol medinos ha'melech Achashverosh, throughout all of the medinos of the king, Hakrovim v'harchokim, near and far. Rabbi Goodman believes that in this document, Mordechai recorded the story exactly as any good Jew would have written it, with all the above missing and embarrassing details included and mentioning Hashem numerous times. After all, it was meant only for Jewish eyes. Obviously, the Gentiles were looking for a document with details of all the events that changed the fate of the Jews from potential victims to good friends of the king. Why was Prime Minister Haman hanged? There were no daily newspapers. They must have known that there was a document describing these events circulating among their Jewish neighbors. The Jews felt uncomfortable being in possession of this document and pleaded with the queen to provide a different one. That was when Mordechai and Esther devised this second Purim Sefer and wrote to their Jewish communities with all power and authority to preserve only this new document and suppress the old one. Thus, the embarrassing secrets were hidden. A secular document that avoided Hashem's name, as the Ibn Ezra noted, was available, and only clever Jews with their Talmudic minds can recognize many of the hidden truths while consulting the Gemara for further details, again for Jewish eyes only. Rabbi Goodman's son, Rabbi Binyamin, made another interesting observation. In contrast to the first scroll written by Mordechai and sent only to the Jews, in the second version, the text adds divrei shalom ve'emes, words of peace and truth. Although some details were omitted without falsifying the facts, this version was able to maintain the peace rather than the dire consequences that would have occurred had the earlier version circulated amongst the Gentile population. When writing the Megillah with its secret clues for Jews and hiding the embarrassing facts from the non-Jews, Mordechai and Esther truly needed and had unique divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh, to have been able to record it in such a clever and masterful way. By including it in our Holy Tanakh, Chazal indicated that they fully recognized and confirmed that this masterpiece was written with prophetic power, as indeed both Mordechai and Esther are listed as having been gifted with prophecy. May we merit to understand the Megillah on deeper levels each year. So earth-shattering was this amazing piece from Rabbi Goodman. I don't even have to tell you that you should like this video, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to use the share button and paste this link into your WhatsApp, text, Instagram, Facebook, or social media of choice. Your friends will be as grateful to get it as you were to see it yourselves, and Rabbi Goodman's work will again be fully realized.